Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on 16th of February of 2023. Today we have some interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's start with the Russian sources map. As you can see, there are a lot of icons of fire in the central and the western part of Ukraine. When talking about Lvov, as you can see, the Russians made another missile attack in the vicinity of Lvov, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost another energy facility in this area. Now let's talk about the central part, and as you can see, there are also a lot of fire icons. The Russians attacked the vicinity of Poltava, Kremenchuk, Krapivnitsk, Kirovograd, and Odessa. Mainly the Russians were targeting the energy facilities and fuel depot. There is a very important note and very important difference between this night attack and the previous attacks. First of all, the Russians uses a very limited number of missiles on the territory of Ukraine. Some sources are saying that there were just 12 missiles, and as you can see, a very big part of those missiles reached the target. And this is very interesting because know that Ukrainians have air defense system, and when talking about hundreds of missiles that the Russians launch in direction of Ukraine, we understand when the Ukrainian sources are saying that they managed to shut down 60, 50% or 70% of those missiles. So that means that as a result, during one missile wave, the Ukrainians are able to destroy 70%. But now, as you can see, the Russians sent just something around 12 missiles, and I'm not sure whether there was or not any reports from the Ukrainian side that they managed to shut down even one missile. So there were just 12 missiles, and it is very difficult to understand whether the Ukrainians were able to shut down any of them. But anyway, no matter the Ukrainians shut down anything or not, as you can see, as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost fuel depot in Poltava and Kremenchuk, and these towns are very close to the front line, to the combat line, and I believe that this is the area where the Ukrainians keeps their reserves of fuel and so on, of parts and so on, and maybe the Russians are planning to connect these attacks with the upcoming further greatest offensive operation from the Russian side. Very difficult to understand, but anyway, I believe that soon we're going to understand everything. Now let's talk about the Kupiansk front line. As you can see, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours they managed to shut down one helicopter Mi-8, and the Ukrainian lost around 65 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system Grad. But as you can see, there are no changes on the ground. The Russians were pushing in direction of Gyaниkovka. The Russians continue improving and developing their bridgehead in the vicinity of Liman I and Sinkovka. But as you can see, there were no movements in direction of Kupiansk. Now let's take a look at Liman front line. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 4 artillery systems, 1 Grad, 2 D-20 howitzer, and 1 Gvozdika on Liman front line. Furthermore, as you can see, there are a lot of icons in the vicinity of Kuzyomovka. The Russians reported that they attack the Ukrainian forces in Novoselovka. They published a video of Russian tank attack from Kolymychiha in direction of Stelmakhovka, and the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours they managed to shut down HIMARS missiles that were sent from Ukrainian side in direction of, I believe that Svatova, or maybe somewhere in the vicinity of Kuzyomovka. Now let's move to Seversk. As you can see, there are no changes as well. The only interesting update that the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation included the information that during the previous 24 hours they destroyed one ammo depot in the vicinity of Verkhnyokamyanskaya, but no pictures, no video confirmation, and no understanding of the value of that attack. When talking about Bakhmut itself, there are no changes on the ground, just the Russian source map has been updated, as you can see. Now the Russians are showing that they controls the north part of Paraskovyevka, this village, and that I believe that these days mainly the clashes are in the vicinity of the railroad station Paraskovyevka, but without any encirclement, without any progress on the ground. There are very heavy clashes, and as we discussed yesterday, the Ukrainians are moving more and more reserves to the north of Bakhmut with one purpose: to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to penetrate this north defense area. When talking about Bakhmut itself, more and more sources are saying that the Ukrainians have almost completed the evacuation process from Bakhmut. when talking about the beginning of this year, or when talking about December of the last year, the Western sources and the Russian sources confirmed that there were around 10,000 soldiers or even more inside this town. But when talking about 16th of February 2023, the Ukrainian sources are saying that there are just a little bit more than 2,500 soldiers in Bakhmut. So as you can see, it is not a very big garrison, but you need to understand that this is not the thing that the Ukrainians took a decision to step back and to leave or retreat from Bakhmut. No. Now, as you can see, the main clashes are on the north part and on the south part. So I believe that Ukrainians just took a decision to use these forces, and they just redeployed some parts to the north and some parts to the south, or something like this. Anyway, the Ukrainians are not going to step back from Bakhmut. Now let's move to the south. One more thing about Donetsk front line. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 135 soldiers, 14 armored vehicles, including 3 tanks. And this is very important because, as we discussed yesterday, tanks is a very great achievement for the Russians if they are able to shut down this or another. To tell the truth, for now, I still don't know what is the reason of this. As I told you, maybe the Ukrainians don't have tanks at all, or at least those one that they are able to use, or maybe the Ukrainians are trying to keep and to save tanks before the Ukrainians' greatest offensive operation. It is very difficult to understand, but I believe that sooner or later we're going to find out the situation. Furthermore, the Russians managed to destroy 5 artillery systems, 2 HIMARS systems in the vicinity of Konstantinovka, 1 D-20 howitzer, another D-30 howitzer, and 1 howitzer Gvozdika. Now let's discuss the situation near Avdiivka. Yesterday in the evening, we discussed this in previous video, the situation of Bakhmutovka, and some sources were saying that the Russians established control over the hills around this town. Some sources were saying that the Russians managed to establish control over entire Bakhmutovka. Later, the Ukrainian sources published information that the Ukrainians took a decision to retreat from Bakhmutovka, and from now on this town is under Russian control. But we need to understand the real situation of Bakhmutovka. I don't think that the Russians started any greatest offensive operation, or I believe it's just a regular routine, and the Russians just forced the Ukrainians to step back from this area, and maybe they're preparing bridgehead before some next step, before some further offensive operation, but it is not going to be something greatest. It will be just a regular tactical offensive operation. In the end of this video, we will return back to Bakhmutovka one more time, and I will try to explain to you why Bakhmutovka and the direction of attack from this bridgehead in direction of Konstantinovka, Donetsk can't be. So we shouldn't rely on this operation as a part of greatest Russian offensive operation. Now let's talk about Marinka and Donetsk. Pesky front line is calm, no changes on this area, but the Russian source map has been updated. The Marinka front line, as you can see, they added a small block on the northwest of Marinka, and the Russians are saying that they took a decision to change the tactic, and they can't cross Marinka from central part, so that's why they took a decision to attack this Marinka from the north and from the south, and after that they will try to cut Marinka somewhere in the west, trying to establish physical or fire or artillery control over the western part, over the area between town by the name of Georgievka and Marinka, and after that they will complete the Marinka offensive operation. When talking about South Donetsk area, there are not much changes in this area, just regular artillery duels. The only interesting update is that the Russians, during the previous 24 hours, managed to destroy headquarters of 72nd Mechanized Brigade located on the salt mine number 3. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians lost 55 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, D-20 howitzer and D-30 howitzer. Now let's talk about Zaporizhzhia area. There are not much changes in this area at all, no movements on the ground and so on. Just the Russians reported that they managed to shut down a few HIMARS rockets that Ukrainians sent from Zaporizhzhia in direction of Tokmak and maybe Melitopol. But when talking about the Ukrainian side, today the Russians published a video of another destroyed column between Vasilievka and Melitopol. As a result of Ukrainian HIMARS attack, the Russians lost just a few tanks and maybe a few armored vehicles. Anyway, this is the problem that most of the Russian experts are talking about, that when talking about the Ukrainians, I believe that I don't remember when the Ukrainians uses a tactic of columns to redeploy their forces. I don't remember when the last time they used this tactic. But when they're talking about the Russians, they still use this tactic when they want to redeploy, or even sometimes when they want to start offensive operation. They build the convoys, they build columns, and then they're doing attack. And just a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, we saw what happened in that case near Ugledar, when around 30 armored vehicles were destroyed, when the Russians took a decision to use the tactic of convoys, of columns to attack. And now another case in the south of Zaporizhzhia. I hope that sooner or later the Russians will change their mind and they will change their tactics, but for now we see we have what we have. When talking about Kherson area, there are very heavy artillery duels in this area, and the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours they destroyed one Akatsa, one Stabi howitzer, and they destroyed around 4 ammo depot in this area, 123rd and 126th Defense Brigade of Kherson area. So that's it about the situation on the ground. And now let's return back to Novo-Bakhmutovka, and I will try to tell you one interesting update about this area. First of all, when talking about Novo-Bakhmutovka, let's take a look at the map of Institute of Study of War. They publish very interesting information about the map. They include one important update. They include the hills in this area. As you can see, this map has been updated, and now according to the map of Institute of Study of War, the Russians did really establish control over Novo-Bakhmutovka, but according to this map, the Russians still haven't established control over these two fortification areas. One of these areas located on the west edge of Novo-Bakhmutovka, and another area is located on this intersection of roads somewhere here. So let's assume that the Russians did establish control over entire area, and now let's update the Western sources map just to understand the real picture on the ground. So these are Novo-Bakhmutovka, so let's assume that the Russians managed to enter N20 road, and now they control something like this. We discussed many times that sooner or later we are going to see another encirclement operation, the encirclement of New York and Donetsk agglomeration. And when talking about the north flank of this operation, the Russians already started their storming of Stupachki, Pritiechina, Alexander Shulgina, Белая Гора, Deliivka, South Deliivka, Druzhba. So there are very heavy clashes there. The Russians still haven't established control over this area, but they're doing everything they can to establish this control over this bridgehead. And of course, as soon as the Russians are able to do this, we see that there is the configuration of the front line can force the Russian to start thinking in direction of encirclement New York and Donetsk agglomeration. But of course, we understand that the only possible solution for the Russians in this case, first of all, in any way, they need to take control over Alexandropol, and furthermore, if they want to encircle this town, they need to move along the road N20, and at least they need to get Romanovka. So this is the minimum area the Russians need to get if they want to encircle or to create a vision of encirclement of Donetsk in New York. And after this movement in, let's say, how much, in 12 kilometers, they will force the Ukrainians from New York and Donetsk to step back. And to tell the truth, this is a very interesting operation for many reasons. And the first and the most important reason, if we take a look at the map of Institute of Study of War, you're going to see that the Russians need to do just one thing. They need to take Alexandropol. Why is that? Because Alexandropol is surrounded by the hills. There is 258 meters hills and 256 meters hills. And if we take a look at the Russian sources map, you're going to see that this is the area where the Ukrainians established their fortification, their trenches, right exactly on the hill. If the Ukrainians are able to storm this area and to take control over this hill, so from this moment they will control the highest place on this bridgehead. And after that, of course, it will be much more easier to continue development their offensive operation direction Sukhaya Balka. As you can see, Sukhaya Balka is surrounded with another hills, but this hills is located on the much lower level, not much, but lower level than Alexandropol, and the Russians will be able to see everything. The distance between these two towns is very short. They will be able to establish artillery control, fire control, and they will start offensive and storm operation of Sukhaya Balkan, and then they can move further to Romanovka. Now let's talk about Donetsk. And Donetsk has a lot of problems, and the main problem of Donetsk is that this town is located in the lowland. As you can see, the north part of Donetsk is located on the level of 198 meters, and let's say that the south part of New York is located on the level of 172 meters. So just imagine yourself the difference between the position that the Russians are able to take control and the Ukrainians will be around 70 meters, even more, 74 meters, and that's a lot. Let's take a look at Ugledar front line, and you're going to see that Ukrainians on Ugledar are located on 241 meters and the Russians located on 216 meters. So the difference in this area is just 30 meters and even less than 30 meters, but this difference gives significant benefits for the Ukrainians to hold this area. Of course, this town itself gives a lot of benefits for the Ukrainians, but as you can see, the distance in the ground plays significant role for defense side. So this is the reason why the Russians have a lot of chances to complete the operation near Donetsk in New York if they are able to take control over Alexandropol, Sukhaya Balka, and to get Romanovka. So from this perspective, we understand everything. So if the Russians are able to get there, they will establish fire control, artillery control, visual control over entire bridgehead, and they will see every single movement. They will be able to aim artillery, to coordinate, and the Ukrainians won't be able to hold this bridgehead in these towns for a very long time, because it's highly unlikely they can do this. But there is one important thing, one important but in this situation, and the thing is that if you take a look at this map, we understand that Ukrainians have their positions along these lakes and along all these towns. So this is the Ukrainian defense lines. And when talking about the Institute of Study of War map, you're going to see that Ukrainians also located on the hill. There is a hill 247, 22, 41, and 47, 89, 91. So the Ukrainians, so it's like a layer. So this is the first layer, this is the middle layer, and this is the slowest and down layer in this situation. So from this perspective, we understand that if the Russians moves along this road, the Ukrainians will meet them with the fire in their flanks, and from this perspective, of course, this operation is not so easy. If the Russians are able somehow to suppress artillery and defense positions along this line, then they can start movement to the north along the road N20, and the story of New York and Donetsk will be finished even faster than the story around Bakhmut. But this defense line on the hill that Ukrainians still holds can cause a lot of problems for the Russians during their offensive operation. So for now, this is the reason I'm saying that I'm not sure that the Russians are planning to develop this bridgehead. I believe that they just short the front line and they pushed Ukrainians from Novobakhmutovka on that side of road N20. I won't be surprised if it was even decision from the Ukrainian side just to short the front line and to use reserves as much as possible. Reserves, they understand that there are a lot of defense lines, and let's say they don't need to keep another 50 or 40 soldiers in Novobakhmutovka because they understand that the Russians won't be able to develop their offensive operation in the direction of Keramik, Alexandropol. So maybe they're just taking all their small parts all over the front lines to create new reserves or something like this. It is also a very interesting question. To tell the truth, I don't remember when the Ukrainians left this or that town just because they took a decision. They tried to fight for every single town till the last building, till the last Ukrainian. And the update, a piece of news that Ukrainians left Novobakhmutovka so fast surprised me very much. Surprised me. But anyway, we see what we see. We have what we have, and let's discuss. I believe that sooner or later we will understand the real plans of the Russians on this bridgehead as well. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.